Hello, this is Justin Perkins, and this is Talk Junkie. It's going to be a solo cast. I don't know how long I'm going to go on this one. Today is Monday something. I don't know, probably the 12th, 13th of January. I don't know what it is. But anyway, yesterday, Sunday, I sat down with a good buddy of mine, Joey Crater, to sit down and record a podcast for you guys. Sometimes it's easier to just meet in social settings and do these places, little hangout spots. We met at a local pizza place. We sat down. I set everything up. We started talking and eating and just getting relaxed before the podcast started. We sit there probably... It's better than 3 hours. We recorded absolutely nothing. We got engaged in an actual conversation. We had fun. We joked around. And we didn't record anything. And the episode I've got planned for him will be really good and really entertaining. And we will record it at some point. We just haven't recorded it yet. I don't know. We got sidetracked to talk. And afterwards, we were talking about hanging out more often. We're trying to do a weekly thing. That's how the very first the other Four Horsemen episode got recorded. That was just going to be a weekly hangout. Things happen. You can't do it. But me and Joey have been able to find a way to make some time to do that, so you can hang out and actually meet people and be around actual people. I enjoy that. I've done a mini cast about the death of conversation. And kind of touched on people not getting together and actually talking. And in that I also talked about my grandfather's store and, how all the older gentlemen would get together and stuff and hang out there. And I have a friend getting ready to open a small business, and she kind of joked around. She was like, this could be, a hangout spot. Everybody could get together. And I got to thinking, between meeting Joey last night and talking to Joey and doing all this stuff, like, there really isn't a place that I could say, I could meet and get together with all my friends. And, to a local community and like a local culture, that together time is very important. And in the past, it's been very formative on what happens locally. And it's a hard thing, I guess, to kind of explain without really going into it. You take, for example, something like my grandfather's store. All these people of a certain age, and it wasn't restricted to that age. It was, just predominantly that age. People of my grandfather's age, because I knew my grandfather, would get together and have discussions and things like that. And if you're not from Eastern Kentucky, I guess it's good to put this into context. You're looking at an area, a place called Pine Top. It has a post office. It had this hardware store, my grandfather's. When I was very young, it had a grocery store, a very small, privately owned grocery store. Another little store, like a little country store. It had a gas station, just one, that is no longer there. And it had the pool hall that my grandfather owned. And this was over, 7 or 8 mile stretch. In this area, things weren't laid out wide, and this is a very narrow stretch, a straight line surrounded by mountains. So there's not a lot in this area, but it's a small area as well. But everybody would meet out there and they would discuss these things and stuff. And then down the road from my grandfather's house store, you had a gas station called Schatz Market. And you would have the same thing there. When I would get up in the morning for work when my grandfather was still living, and this was after you didn't have as many. Like when I was very young and I would get up and go out to my grandfather's, especially like on a Saturday, because the post office at that time was right next door. The bench out front was full. The seats inside were full. It was a constant, steady flow of people and a constant, steady flow of interaction and discussion. By the time I was, and that's late 80s, early 90s, by the time I was, an adult and working every day, most days I'd try to leave for work early. So I'm swinging by my grandfather's at his hardware store. At that time's really all that was left. Around 5:30, and I'd go in, I'd talk to my grandfather, and there really wouldn't be anybody there. It would just be him. I would leave there, I would stop at Shots, maybe go in, get something for lunch and get a snack, and there may be one or two people there. And, on my way back in that evening, there may be 2-3 people sitting there talking with Shot, and then you go on up to my grandfather's store, and if I actually went in my grandfather's store that evening, there may be 4 or 5 people there talking. Now, at about 7 or 8 o'clock every morning, there was a group of old men that come down and they shot pool and discussed things, and this was all in the later days. But to that point, excuse me, to that point, that was all there was on Pine Top at this, and you're looking mid-2000s, 2005, somewhere in there. And there was a little small, like a auto repair place up the road, and it had a group of people that came out every day and sit down there and talked. Probably by the mid-2000s, you're looking at probably 5-6 people. So you have these 3 establishments, 5-6 people in them at all times, talking, discussing things. Compared to when I was younger, they would be 5-6 people at that auto repair place sitting around talking. They would be literally anywhere from 10 to 15 people at my grandfather's store. And then you add in the pool hall, you're getting the youth there, and it could be anywhere from 5 to 25 people, especially in the evening, on any given evening. And then you go to Shots, you're looking 5 to 6 people down there. And then you go out to where our road ends, and you get onto a different highway there, and you've got a place called Big Y. Same thing there, 5-6 people there hanging out. And you also have what they call the Dairy Queen crowd, the older gentlemen that come in every morning, sit down, drink their coffee. And you have the Double Quick crowd, the same thing, in a gas station. So there's all these social spots that these older people were getting together, discussing things, discussing politics, discussing just everyday life, but interacting with each other and interacting with locally owned businesses. And it was doing 2 things. It was putting money into the businesses, and it was allowing for social interaction. And they were very important in my life, in my formative years, because I was around a lot of this. Every day when the store closed, I would go with my grandfather to his brother's house, and 4, 5, 6 guys that usually out the store would be there. And, they would have a discussion till 8 or 9 o'clock about anything. It is whatever, they would meet, And I remember people of an older generation saying, I'm going to go visit with somebody. I'm going to go visit with so-and-so. And that would entail going to their house, sitting around, and just gossiping, talking, enjoying each other's company for hours, and then coming home. You fast forward now to a lot of that generation has passed away, or is at a very advanced age. I'm talking 80s and 90s. And, my grandfather's store is gone. The little grocery store had been gone for a while. The other country store is gone. The gas station is gone. This place is, the auto repair place is gone. This place is a ghost town. I'm gone. I don't live there any longer. I don't live far from there, but I don't live there. There is this huge void of social things going on. People are not out and engaged and seeing each other in that area. Now, at first, this bled over when all these things started to leave to this group of people who met at a local restaurant every morning for coffee and breakfast, and at a local gas station that has a restaurant in it for coffee and breakfast. It kind of bled over to that, and the numbers there kind of swelled. These in a way, are locally owned businesses. They are locally owned businesses. They're just larger businesses. They're not your small mom and pops. They're larger entity, but it is local. And nobody came back in and replaced these small businesses that had went out. And also, they didn't replace this engagement in the community and this social interaction between people, And so this has faded away and got there's still people meeting in these two areas, these two restaurant areas for morning discussion, and I'm seeing now a lot of times evening discussion. And I belong to a fire department, and we do an auction to help with money because it's volunteer. You're not getting paid or getting any money really coming into the fire department unless you earn it. And it's become a social gathering because it's in that same area to some degree. I see a lot of the older men I seen when I was younger come into my grandfather's store, and that gives me this feeling of nostalgia, and I enjoy it because I have a lot of respect for these men, and I seen them a lot. And I say men because that just was not a setting that we had a lot of women come into, and that's another thing with that generation. Home visits were big with women, and I wasn't as exposed to that. I was somewhat exposed to church home visits. Certain churches and stuff would come do home visits. My grandmother belonged to an organization that did that to some degree, and so I was experiencing that. But it seemed like the female, a lot of times the female interaction with that generation involved more around work and preparation of food and work in the gardens and things like that. It's like they never really took a break once they got to retirement age. They kind of kept with the work. It's like their work wasn't done, and they seemed to bond also over things I think that they may have done with their mothers and stuff, and they'd done with their friends. But anyway, I took for granted when I was younger that this interaction between people and this form of conversation and socializing was just common. And I do believe that it very much was at that time. Now, I can't speak for outside of this area. I don't know because I've not, especially large cities, I've not spent extensive times in large cities. Maybe this is not an issue they're facing, and maybe this is just indicative of the isolation of where we are, because, we were extremely isolated from the rest of the country. People talk about settling out west. Well, settling out west, no doubt, was hard work. But getting over those mountains into Kentucky with no roads and nothing, and those first settlers that come in here, was very hard as well. And then once you got here, a lot of times you were forgotten. You were forgotten by the government. You were forgotten by society. You were ostracized for where you lived and how separate you were, but you were only separate because of the extreme conditions to get here and to have contact, and I think that was somewhat prevalent, even if it was to a small degree, until the internet era really exploded and allowed us to connect to other people more outside of the region. And that's allowed us to develop as a very unique culture as far as, everything from food to dialect to belief structures. We become very fiercely independent and also very unique because of that. And so I don't know if this is a problem that's not permeated out into the rest of the country, or if it's very prevalent there, just in a different manner. But I assumed as a child naively that this was such an enjoyable part of my day, even though I really wasn't involved in the conversation, that it was very important to to everyone, and so therein it would last and not be forgotten or lost, as it were. And it did not appear at any point in my childhood really that would be the case. It appeared that this form of social interaction, infused with local businesses and conversation, was so prevalent and so important that it was just a part of life. And as I grew from a young child into a teenager, because as a young child I played with a lot of other kids. There were, local kids and stuff. We didn't have a block, and we didn't have it wasn't like a suburb where you've got house to house to house. There may be miles in between houses, or there may be a cluster of 5 or 6 houses of which only 2 houses have kids, and then you go a mile, or then you go 2. So it's very laid out and separated, but you very much have the opportunity to interact with other kids because they would come down to the store and things of that nature. So as a kid, I was able to socialize, between school, some after school activities, but I had family and neighbors close by, and I had a lot of friends there that I was able to interact with. And as I grew into my early teens, interaction was constant. You would have interaction at school all day, and then you may physically be on the phone with a girl for an hour, 2 hours a night, or talk to your friends, or go stay all night. I was constantly staying all night with people, or people staying all night with me. And I had a pool hall there where a lot of people of my age, or 4 or 5 years older, spent a lot of time. So I got a huge amount of social interaction in that setting and thought that was common. And again, this is before social media. This is before the internet era had really hit hard there, It was a matter of every day seeing and interacting with people, having real life interactions, and doing so in this pool hall that my grandfather owned. And on the weekends, going to the skating rink that was locally owned, and hanging out there, and it was going into these local places and having some sort of interaction with my friends, local restaurants, the local festivals. Every year you have a yearly festival in your county, and in our county festival, Gingerbread, that was the place you went and seen your friends, and the local basketball games you went to see I have no love whatsoever for high school sports. I firmly believe all school sports should be privatized. So I was not there to watch the basketball team or the people who played on the team that I didn't really know, or it was purely to hang out, and there were small little local places that were important for hangouts, and as a teenager, you were either at your friend's house socializing with them there when you had the opportunity, or you were at one of these local events or local things, and socializing and being there. And again, I took for granted that is such a vital part of who we are as a people, as a community, as a culture, that is just expected and will go on. And when I was younger, because again, like right now, we're talking 2020. Subway is a national chain, Dairy Queen is a national chain, and Arby's is a national chain. That's what we have in our county as far as food goes. And the Arby's is a gas station. So that's your option. Now there are local options still, and they still far outnumber the national options. But that's it. When I was younger, as far as my memory goes, I remember a Druthers, and that was a national chain. I believe it was national anyway, but it was a larger chain before Dairy Queen, and it eventually became Dairy Queen. And at one point in time, we had a Taco Bell for a little while, So when I was younger, most things were local businesses, and still to this day. We had local grocery stores. We don't have a Kroger or a Food City or anything of that nature. We have a locally owned IGA and a locally, and a Save-A-Lot. They may be national brands, but they're not huge, And I know who owned them, Like the IGA literally had someone's name in front of it, It was a local owner. We had local video stores. We have never had Blockbuster or anything of that nature, but we had Movies and Munches and Video Solution, and eventually others came along, but those were the two big ones when I was younger, and they were very important. They were very vital parts of the community and stuff. It was every weekend making a trip down there for a lot of years and going and hanging out and seeing what was new and what was released. It was big in the movies, especially at that time. It was huge in the movies. And so you have all these local establishments. They're not huge businesses, but, some clothing stores were local, that, one of which is still in business. But so much of the local economy was locally owned and was people were there more and more often, probably due to, the next, I guess you'd call city, the next area outside of our county that's any bigger that had a Walmart or anything. It's depending on what part of the county you live in, anywhere from 5 to 40 minutes away, or 30 minutes away. And so at that time we were a lot more focused in county. The local radio station, was very popular, especially, adult contemporary, I guess, during the day, and that kept adults. And then, for teenagers, there was a more rock, more alternative-based thing with, a hipper, I guess at that time, option for them in the evenings. And then, for whatever reason, a lot of the construction workers and coal mine workers locally around listened to classic rock on that channel in the evenings on night shift into the next day. So the radio station was a big part of the local group. So here you have two things going on simultaneously. You have a large group of local businesses that are being supported very well locally, and you have a much more prevalent culture of socialization and interacting in these environments, in these local businesses and things of that nature. And to me, this was very common and very important. The local fireworks show was a big deal on 4th of July. These sound like small things, but this is a small town, and it also you have to look at it from the point of view of opportunities to be engaged with other local people. Those opportunities are few and far between sometimes with an area this small and without a mall or anything of that nature, because mall culture was very big in larger cities for this same reason. It was an opportunity to socialize. So probably around, I would say, early to mid 2000s, when social media starts to pick up steam, you start to see this small shift on multiple reasons in this area. Going in from the mid 2000s to the teens, is you're losing this generation, my grandfather's generation, of these people who are very they've got a lot of free time, they're retired, and they're very socially interactive, and doing so based on these small businesses and around these small businesses. So the small businesses that were more dependent upon that generation of people also starts to wane and fade away a little bit. A lot of times you can drive around our local area, and somebody that knows the area pretty good, they can say, well, there's where a skating rink used to be. My family owned two different places at one point were a skating rink. and there's probably kids that don't even know what a skating rink is today, but that was a huge thing. And they were phased out before my time. When I was very, very young, before the second one closed, that was already starting to shift. But there was a furniture store, and there was all these things that are no longer there. You can kind of see the remnants of, and the relics of a more robust local economy. But you also see a lack of people. It's the same population. Probably it's grown, would be my guess. Especially, you look at this exodus of people who left and went north in my grandfather's generation to work and then came back to retire. That increased the population, and then, we've started to lose those people. So now you've got a similar population, maybe a little less, but you don't have the local business. You also don't have the local interaction. When I was, 5, 6 year old, the teenage kids would hang out in front of my grandfather's store at night after it was closed. I guess just mainly because there was a street light there and there was nothing else to do. So they were meeting, and I remember 5, 6 kids there, 7, 8, 10 on big nights, and them talking and just joking. Nothing huge, but they were getting together, listening to music and socializing. And not only would I see that there, but even as I got a little bit older, I would see that at the local mall in the parking lot at night. You would see these people together and socializing and interacting together in a large group. And then you would go to the local park on a summer day, and it would be completely full. It would take forever to get an opportunity to get on the court at the basketball courts to play in a game, to sit there and wait. The local pool was generally full. All these things were full. And you could visibly see the patronage of the places because you could see the large groups of people. We had a local festival. It was huge. Then something happened in the 2000s here that I think happened everywhere. And, this is not an anti-technology rant, because I believe this is a 50-50 issue. But something happened here in the 2000s, happened in a lot of places, I think, just because of our low population and the way that our communities are structured. It had a little bit more of an issue, became a little bit more of an issue here. And I'm going to kind of stage this to where the timeline makes sense and why they coincide. In 95 to say 98, you still had these local businesses, you still had these kids getting together on strip jobs and partying, you still had all of these socializing activities, you still had all these things. There were house parties, there were large groups of people, and you still had that. From 2000, somewhere in around 2000 to 2005, the pain pill epidemic hits. These large pharmaceutical companies gave this stuff out like candy, and it was such a multifaceted problem. One, doctors are prescribing it hand over fist because they're making huge kickbacks, and these drug reps are making huge money. And pharmaceutical companies are making huge money. They're giving this stuff out hand over fist. So when it comes from a doctor, I think parents were more likely to take it themselves, and because it came from, and it was being misprescribed and overprescribed. But then it was making its way into the hands of the youth. And here, marijuana, and in my opinion, is not a drug. It is being, if you got caught with marijuana, that was it. Your academic opportunities were probably done. If you had any any aspiration for much of anything. As a kid, if you got caught with pot, you were done. You were labeled and you were done. And the police were very very hard on you because of the drug. Whereas in the initial days of the introduction of pills, a lot of people were getting them legally. They had prescriptions. And so the kids were getting them, and nobody was looking at the kids in regards to the pills. It hadn't full blown yet, so it was easier to get, bar none. It is one of the easiest drugs, with the exception of cigarettes in the history of the world to get, because it was so prevalent at that time. These drugs came in, and it started in our area to shift this social thing. We went from, and look, I'm no saint, I've done things as well, and as being a part of it and being in on it, we went from, it was a twofold problem for these local hangouts and these local businesses. One, if teenage and late teen kids were there, the first thing that happened was less money came in, especially something like a pool hall or something like that, because a good chunk of their money were going towards the drugs. Then they had to get the drugs, and they had to have somewhere to meet to get the drugs. So a lot of these places, hanging out the mall and all, became, this is where we meet and get drugs. So they become a law enforcement problem, and they became an issue for the owner of the establishment, because one, you're not making as much money, but you probably got as many kids, and the kids are really just there buying and selling and doing drugs. So your numbers are the same, but your income is down. And that was a blow initially to the businesses. So the businesses had to respond with, no loitering, no this. And so that pushed some people away. The people who weren't doing drugs were already pushed away because the drugs have become prevalent in these areas. The people who were doing drugs or were looking for drugs become wary because law enforcement would poke around, and so they stepped back. And that left you with one of two things: the type of place that was trying to be run correctly and law enforcement was involved, and that cut your numbers down, or the type of place that just kind of turned a blind eye to it, and you weren't making any more money, your numbers were up, but you just, you had a bad reputation, your establishment had a bad reputation, and it was becoming a worsening condition instead of working itself out and balancing itself out. So you start to get a decline in the participation in young people in these areas, in these local businesses, these local hangout spots, these local spots where people were getting together. Then this goes from a little bit of a problem to an epidemic. And these pills are extremely addictive. And you expect a 16-year-old to not get hooked on something that's designed to be hooked on. But you don't hold a company accountable for handing this stuff out like candy. But that was the truth of the matter at that time. And it's so addictive, and it's so prevalent, and it's so easy to get. I mean, it's being pumped in here that it becomes an epidemic. And at this point, your numbers are dropping way down. Not just for businesses, but for things like the local park, things like, the bowling alleys, and everything's dropping. Even the kids meeting at the mall, if the numbers are up, they're up for a bad reason, so the cops have to come in, so then the numbers drop again. These people retreat, and they retreat from being in large social groups, interacting and getting out, into being isolated into small groups of people you did the drugs with, looking for someone to get the drugs from, while trying to avoid large groups of people because you don't want to be seen high or out of it, and the police. So you go from these large social gatherings in public to somewhat smaller social gatherings in private. These house parties go from something kind of fun to something kind of dark. And these big parties up on these strip jobs, because that's a hard place for the cops to get, become very prevalent, but they become infected with the drugs. So here we've changed. We have traded our social interaction out in large public places for these more, at least at this time, semi-private interactions that are based around something very negative. And from there, there's this transition even further down the rabbit hole to, okay, every time we get in this large group, now the cops are looking at this and say, let's bring our circle in tighter. Let's get it down to 5 to 9 people. 4 or 5 people we really want to hang out with, and 4 or 5 people that'll bring in the drugs. And let's do that. So then you've lost this large social gathering in public places, and then you've cut that down to a little bit smaller social gathering, even though it may be for the wrong reasons, in semi-private conditions. And now that's went even underground to we're in my living room or my basement on a weekend. Blah, 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 come over and bring this. So people have isolated themselves to their homes, or to, most time, homes. I mean, any type of private situation. So now it becomes a private thing. And as addiction grows, you kind of get 2 types of people. You get people that they're experimenting, so they're still in party mode, and they still want to socialize, and they still want people around. And then you get people that are firmly addicted. They despise the social interaction. They just need the drug, because the drug feels like it makes you a social animal, but it doesn't. It makes you a pariah in your own mind, and it separates you mentally from those people around you. So the drug has now taken over, and socializing is last thing on your mind. Socializing is taking a back seat to getting high. And so we've went from, in not a generation, and not a decade, in probably a 5-year span, maybe 6, we've went from these large groups of kids who are going to replace these older people who have stopped socializing and gathering in these places. Now the kids have come up and they've taken over that, and they've started. And they're supposed to run this out to the end of their life, and then that's supposed to be replaced by the next generation. And drugs have put a serious dent in that and taken that to a large degree and taken it away. And here's this hole, this missing piece, and we no longer have this interaction with local business and local area from people getting together and socializing in a positive way. Now we have a drug addiction epidemic. And that's not it. That's not the end of the story, and that's not the end of what happens. But I'm going to try to keep these short and keep them broke up. So that's where we're going to stop right now. In part 2, we're going to start off from there and then go into what changed going forward and into the future. So thank you very much for listening. This is Talk Junkie. I want to thank a couple people real quick before I get off. Hot Rods Pizza in Hyman, Kentucky, because they always allow us to come in, loiter, talk, and even though we were supposed to record a show there last night and didn't because we ended up having too much fun, they did allow us to come in. I really thank them for that. Chain Reaction BJJ in Hazard, Kentucky. Look them up online. Unbelievable people, unbelievable instruction, great participation from the black belt that we're under. He comes down from Lexington often. It's a great group of people and a great organization to be a part of. My books are available on Amazon.com. Cold Kingdom is available. The one I wrote for my son, Everyone is Different Just Like Me, and The Boy Super Hearing. They're both available on there. They're available for Amazon Prime free shipping. I think there's $6 on there for sale right now. But if you live local, I'd rather miss a book sale and you wait a month or so and go to Red Spotted Newt. That's READ, Red Spotted Newt in Hazard, Kentucky, when they open, and buy your books there. That's a local business, a local bookstore, hopefully one day a local hangout that you have to support the things around you if you want the things around you to grow, and I think that's a good thing. But, if you don't live close, order them on Amazon, or wait a month and call the Red Spotted Newt and they'll probably ship you one. I don't know how that works. But next episode we'll be back to kind of pick up where we left off. Like and subscribe to Talk Junkie. Find us on YouTube. Find us on Apple Podcasts. We're on Google now. We're on Spreaker. We're on basically every provider for podcasts now. I'm still not back on social media yet and advertising on social media, but people are finding this. I get my downloads and listens every day, and I'm like, wait a minute. Somebody's finding it. Somebody's doing something. So check it out. If you like it, give it a like and keep coming back. So we'll be back with part 2.